Australia is the sixth biggest country on the planet. In fact, its size is almost equal to that of the USA excepting Alaska. But if we glance at the map of the US and Australia at midnight, we tend to see completely different patterns. On the US side, cities and little cities reach far inland, and on the Australian aspect, the territory within the interior is nearly depopulated, and large and little cities are settled solely on the coast. Although in terms of absolute population it is not applicable to check the two countries, this distinction helps to check the population patterns of each country. So the queries are, why do virtually 95% of Australians live here after they have such a large territory within the interior? Why do people within the US vote the inside away from the coast? And why has the Australian government failing to regulate its population? Both the autochthonous Australians and the initial European settlers who came to Australia determined where to major supported the provision of the resources they required to survive, such as water, food, and shelter, and it had been traditional for the primary settlers to arrive during a country to try to therefore on the coasts and later begin to explore the inside of the country, beginning new settlements. As it happened, for instance, within the United States, this is shown in these maps that illustrate the settlement areas in four completely different years: 1790, 1840, 1880, and 1890. However, this did not occur in Australia. In the outback, there are not any little cities, let alone giant cities. The main reason is that almost all of the Australian outback is desert and semi-desert, with warm, eroded tract and extreme climate to support giant cities and small cities. These desert areas have arisen as a result of Australia receives the second least precipitation within the world. When Antarctica, on the aspect of the central region of the country, is Lake Eyre, wherever many rivers flow, but most of the time they need no water. So it's not troublesome to conclude why this part of Australia is much depopulated, in distinction within the Japanese region along the entire coast. There is the good dividing range, and not like the inside. Most of the coastal regions are green and endued with natural waters, and that is why Australians' population patterns are therefore robust. Water means that life, it facilitates survival and often interprets into rich food. As a result of rivers create the closed soil, additional fertile for growing crops. It conjointly makes fishing and therefore the raising of farm animals and different livestock attainable. Hence the primary autochthonous Australians sought after more inhabitable places on the east and south coasts of what's called the Muric watercourse. Primitive tribes used every kind of components of the natural surroundings to sustain their way of life, like stones, bones, plants, and shells. However, water provided like a watercourse was maybe the far most vital resource. But early settlers settled during this phase of the country not solely due to access to fresh water and intensive farmland, however conjointly because of the gold rush. This attracted thousands of immigrants, principally to New South Wales and Victoria. In these a pair of states, wherever Australia's largest cities, state capital and Melbourne, are settled, the largest gold discoveries materialized, so gold attracted many thousands of immigrants and reworked the longer term of Australia. But the initial reason that explains why almost 95% of Australians live to tell the tale the east coast of the country is as a result of they need easy access to water, and within the interior of this country they are doing not, and this might conjointly make a case for why settlements were created within the US not only on the geographical region, however conjointly within the interior of the country. The reason is that the Mississippi River is 3,700 km long watercourse which crosses much the entire US from north to south. Flowing through 10 states from Minnesota to New Orleans, water isn't solely very important for human consumption or agriculture, however, conjointly for trade, since most final products need giant quantities of water to be finished. Economic activities associated with fishing are developed around this watercourse, and therefore the forests in the Mississippi Depression encourage timber production. The fertile lands, thanks to its proximity to the watercourse, facilitate the cultivation of rice, sugarcane, cotton, and cereals. In addition, the water is additionally accustomed to generate electricity by most industries. Not solely that, however, shipping is that the most cost-effective way to transport giant quantities of products, which is why most of a country's largest cities are settled on the coasts or on the banks of an oversized watercourse. It is aforesaid that the passable rivers of the world were the highways of civilization since ancient times. Nowadays, these rivers are still the cheapest ways to transport product. The Mississippi carries 100% of the nation's goods, some 460 million heaps of products such as coal, steel, aluminum, and agricultural products. The Mississippi explains constant settlement patterns that North American countries full-fledged with the St. Lawrence watercourse, New York with the Hudson River, or Egypt with the Nile River. In short, a watercourse just like the Mississippi and its entire watercourse network explains partly why within the US there are various states thus far from the coasts, and in Australia there aren't. In Australia, the few folks that board these desert ranges and with troublesome access to water are largely autochthonous folks that, despite having to beat several challenges to survive, continue to opt for this territory as a result of their affiliation to the land is extremely deep. The rest of Australians are forced in a few cities and their metropolitan areas such as state capital, Melbourne and Brisbane on the geographical region, and state capital on the geographical region. But the government desires to vary this trend. There is a current dialogue in Australia regarding whether or not to attract additional immigrants. In the country, half of the population is formed up of immigrants. Within the last 20 years alone, more than 3.6 million have arrived, a high number considering its total population of 25 million. So the perplexity among Australians is that this influx of immigrants has benefited the country demographically. As a result of it has multiplied the fertility rate that is due to immigration. Enough babies are being born in Australia to maintain adequate increment. But on the opposite hand, some say that the high number of immigrants Australia receives annually is unsustainable. As a result of the states and resources such as water won't support the 36 million people Australia expects to possess by 2050. For the reason, the government has tried to modify the population, that is to create incentives and plans for additional folks to live in places apart from the popular ones such as the state capital, Melbourne and Brisbane, and thus relieve the pressure on these cities. In fact, the government has had programs in place for many decades to draw in immigrants to the regions far away from the coast. There are specific reasons for this, however, despite the fact that there could be employment opportunities and sensible quality of life in these regions. In the Finnish, immigrants behave like young Australians and are attracted exactly by Melbourne, Sydney, state capital, and Brisbane. It is smart from an immigrant's purpose of view. Most are versatile and educated, therefore it is reasonable that they need to major within the cities wherever they realize not solely the simplest jobs but wherever they need the best access to universities, searching centers, medical centers, sports facilities, amusement, and so on. In addition, the upper population density of large cities makes it additional probably to measure near people of constant language culture, and these reasons make a case for partly why the government has failing in its decide to for good populate with immigrants areas of the country other than the three or four huge cities on the coast. The Canadian government has conjointly sought after to populate the northern part of the country, but as in Australia, each natives and immigrants still opt to board the key southern cities like Toronto and urban centre. From that, one might deduce that dominant people's preferences may be terribly sophisticated for a government, and thus it's probably that this map of Australia at midnight can still look constant in 2050, solely with these larger megalopolises. So, guys, this was for today. Give us your thoughts on this in the comment section, and if you appreciate our content, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this video with your family and friends. We will meet soon in a new video. Thank you and Jai Hind.